Hello everyone and welcome to the next review. Today's review is going to be for In Praise of Shadows by Junichiro Tanizaki. I read this book in 2019, long before I'd started The Other Word. For whatever reason I never got to reviewing it. I think it's just a case of details fading away eventually and becomes more difficult to review. But we're here now. I did actually review this book in a sense by including a quote from it in my essay, my video essay, The Humble Dark. So let's begin. This book is in fact a portal. Reading it, you will be led by Junichiro Tanizaki's light touch into a mysterious and tranquil world of darkness and shadows, where gold flashes in the gloom and a deep stillness reigns. If you are accustomed to equate light with clarity, the faded with the worthless and the dim with the dreary, prepare for a courteous but powerful realignment of your ideas. In Praise of Shadows is a poetic paean to traditional Japanese aesthetics, in a free-ranging style that moves from architecture to no theatre, and from cookery to lighting. Tanizaki teaches us to see the beauty in tarnished metal, the sombre dignity in unglazed pottery, the primacy of organic materials that bear witness to the regular touch of human hands. It is also astonishingly prescient, offering a gentle warning against the quest for airbrushed perfection, and reminding us that too much light can pollute and obscure our natural world. So I think one of the reasons I picked this book up several years ago now is that I was drawn in by Tanizaki's history. Tanizaki was a prolific Japanese author, but he seems to straddle the line between appreciation of Western aesthetics and Eastern aesthetics. He grew up in Tokyo in 1886 and was very much ingratiated into the Western world. His family owned a printing establishment, and he worked and lived in Tokyo, a particularly cosmopolitan area. However, after a series of earthquakes, particularly one in 1923, he moved into as it says here, the more cultivated Kyoto-Osaka region, the more cultivated and gentle region. And he seems to have undergone a kind of a sea change in terms of his thinking, where he went back to his roots. He absorbed the Japanese past, as it says here, and abandoned his superficial westernization. So here he really becomes interested in Japanese aesthetics, and these inform his many, many works. And just looking at my works in the past and the books that I've read, I think I do have an interest in Eastern aesthetics and ideals. For example, I remember writing a story inspired by the Japanese art of kintsugi, and indeed I remember reading a book before In Praise of Shadows, Wabi Sabi, the Japanese Art of Impermanence by Andrew Juniper. And there are so many books I need to review by Japanese authors, in particular Kobo Abe's The Woman in the Dunes and Osamu Dazai's No Longer Human. Perhaps I will get to these eventually. So in keeping with Eastern aesthetics, there's no sense of clarity, or the writing is clear and it's not dry at all. It's very, very readable and enjoyable, but there's no sense of clarity in terms of the structure here. It's a very free-flowing book. It's almost stream of consciousness in a way. I think Tanizaki is really just letting himself be taken away by what he's writing. It's almost one feels as if one is moving through shadow as one is reading these. It's an essay, but it's not a structured, rigorous intellectual argument. He's just letting himself go as he's talking about, for example, Japanese architecture, paper, tin, and dirt, the beauty of candlelight and lacquerware, the enigma of shadows, shadows on the stage, his quite passionate discussion of no theatre, traditional Japanese theatre. And yet through all this, there is also a kind of, he's quite polemic. He has a kind of a polemical spirit to him as well, which is, I do tend to latch on to works like this where There's not a sense of languidness, because he has that kind of a more biting, acerbic touch at points. He almost feels as if he is railing against what is essentially, particularly the American influence, this desire for brightness and clarity, and everything must be louder and more strident. We must be the best. We must be dominant. But of course, and as this book really points towards, the Japanese aesthetic, the Eastern aesthetic, is one of shadow, impermanence, transience, imperfection. It is the awareness of our being natural beings. It is the awareness of death, our animality. And indeed, as I'm saying these things, I am reminded of the fact that most of what I have seemed to value, from fiction to even ecological practice, is that awareness of transience and death and darkness and so forth. Obviously studying carrion beetles and being aware of the death acceptance movement, and writing stories, for example, a story, Bright House, Black Dog, in which a father is obsessed with sterility and cleaning his house constantly, but his son brings in dirt into his domain. And so I wanted to read this book, and I remember at the time wanting to read it to affirm an appreciation of these kinds of this worldview, of not always wanting things to be perfect and sterile and clean. We need shadow and mysteriousness and an appreciation of just the quiet and the subdued and the still. And so before I get on to Tanizaki's own words, by reading some excerpts, I just want to draw your attention to a very succinct review of this book by A.C. Grayling. Junichiro Tanizaki selects for praise all things delicate and nuanced, everything softened by shadows and the patina of age, anything understated and natural, as for example the patterns of grain in old wood, the sound of rain dripping from eaves and leaves, or washing over the footing of a stone lantern in a garden, and refreshing the moss that grows about it. And by doing so, he suggests an attitude of appreciation and mindfulness, especially mindfulness of beauty, as central to life lived well. So, I read this book some time ago now, of course, and my notes aren't in order, but I will read some excerpts to you, and perhaps they might stir some ideas and associations. As a general matter, we find it hard to be really at home with things that shine and glitter. The Westerner uses silver and steel and nickel tableware and polishes it to a fine brilliance, but we object to the practice. While we do sometimes indeed use silver for tea kettles, decanters, or sake cups, we prefer not to polish it. On the contrary, we begin to enjoy it only when the lustre has worn off, when it has begun to take on a dark, smoky patina. I'm reminded again just of the value of the natural object, the object showing its imperfection. There is, of course, beauty and a perfect thing, but we tend to value this too much, especially in our everything becoming, again, sleek and unadorned, sterile, white walls and glass. The almost I'm reminded of a phrase, rotten with perfection. It's a fantastic phrase. I can't remember who said it, but rotten with perfection. It's imperfection that gives things texture and character, of course. Again, as people like Byung-Chul Han would say, the thing is warm, characterful, textured. The thing is it embeds us in the world, whereas the non-thing is naked, unadorned. It is, the non-thing is anti-materiality, it's anti-human, whereas something with a dark, smoky patina, it reminds us that we are animals and that we live in a messy, biological, complex world. There is no denying, at any rate, that among the elements of the elegance in which we take such delight is a measure of the unclean, the insanitary. I suppose I shall sound terribly defensive if I say that Westerners attempt to expose every speck of grime and eradicate it, while we Orientals carefully preserve and even idealize it. Yet for better or for worse, we do love things that bear the marks of grime, soot and weather, and we love the colours and the sheen that call to mind the past that made them. Living in these old houses among these old objects is in some mysterious way a source of peace and repose. I couldn't help but smile as I was reading the colours and the sheen that call to mind the past and made them. I had not actually read this excerpt in some years, and I'm just glad to read that here. Objects that are unclean, that have the mark of our human touch, or the touch of of other natural beings. All of these things root us in the earth. They show the heritage of the earth. They call to mind the past that made them. I love this line. Living in these old houses among these old objects is in some mysterious way a source of peace and repose. Now this next excerpt is very important in that what it tells us about darkness and how Westerners tend to think about darkness. And yet, when we gaze into the darkness that gathers behind the crossbeam, around the flower vase, beneath the shelves, though we know perfectly well it is mere shadow, we are overcome with the feeling that in this small corner of the atmosphere there reigns complete and utter silence, that here in the darkness immutable tranquility holds sway. The mysterious Orient, of which Westerners speak, probably refers to the uncanny silence of these dark places, and even we as children would feel an inexpressible chill as we peered into the depths of an alcove to which the sunlight had never penetrated. Where lies the key to this mystery? Ultimately, it is the magic of shadows. Were the shadows to be banished from its corners, the alcove would in that instant revert to mere void. We tend, I think, to see darkness as negation, negativity, in a purely, in almost a terrifying way. But of course, this can be extrapolated out into the cosmos. We see the darkness of the cosmos as a great nihilistic yawning void of nothing, whereas in fact it is actually a primordial source of being, its potentiality. But however, I'm just thinking, coming back down to earth again, on the point of darkness in architecture, I do have to admit that although I do have quite a low opinion of modernist architecture, especially architecture that is just basically living in a box with white walls and glass everywhere, I will say, however, that there is an appreciation of simplicity in modernist architecture, contemporary architecture. These buildings still let in a lot of light, but they do actually emulate more the Japanese traditional way of architecture, their building practices. So it's not clear cut. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance here. Now, this particular excerpt here it points to the Western desire for progress. But what produces such differences in taste? In my opinion, it is this. What I love about this book is that Tanizaki's personal experiences really inform the text and get across so much. This year I had great trouble making up my mind where to go for the autumn moon viewing. Finally, after much perplexed head scratching, I decided on the Ishiyama temple. The day before the full moon, however, I read in the paper that there would be loudspeakers in the woods at Ishiyama to regale the moon viewing guests with phonograph records of the Moonlight Sonata. I cancelled my plans immediately. Loudspeakers were bad enough, but if it could be assumed that they would set the tone, then there would surely be floodlights too, strung all over the mountain. I remember another ruined moon viewing, the year we took a boat on the night of the harvest, full moon, and sailed out of the lake of the Sumo Temple. We put together a party. We had our refreshments in lacquered boxes. We set bravely out. But the margin of the lake was decorated brilliantly with electric lights in 5 colours. There was indeed a moon, if one strained one's eyes for it. Light does not necessarily bring clarity. It hides the wealth of the world. For example, the light pollution obscuring the stars, the great source of wonder, or indeed the moon, the light of the moon. This particular excerpt here is comical but also deeply poignant. The author of the Vox Populi Vox Dei column in the Osaka Ahasi recently castigated city officials who quite needlessly cut a swathe through a forest and levelled a hill in order to build a highway through Mino Park. I was somewhat encouraged, for to snatch away from us even the darkness beneath trees that stand deep in the forest is the most heartless of crimes. At this rate, every place of any beauty in Nara, or in the suburbs of Kyoto and Osaka, as the price of being turned over to the masses, will be denuded of trees. But again, I am grumbling. I admittedly find a kindred spirit, and there's a sense in which Tanizaki is wanting to just let himself go and appreciate his roots in Japanese culture, is to be within that shadow that he's writing about. But there are pockets of deep feeling where he's really railing against change, progress, destruction of natural beauty and so forth. There might still be somewhere, possibly in literature or the arts, where something could be saved. And in saved, I'm thinking of Michel Siri's Saving Perception. See my review on Non-Things by Byung-Chul Han. I would call back, at least for literature, this world of shadows we are losing. In the mansion called literature, I would have the eaves deep and the walls dark. I would push back into the shadows the things that come forward too clearly. I would strip away the useless decoration. I do not ask that this be done everywhere, but perhaps we may be allowed at least one mansion where we can turn off the electric lights and see what it is like without them. The notion, I think, that literature or the arts, broadly construed, they allow us that contrast, the ability to experience quiet and dark and so forth. Fantastic prose there. Junichiro Tanizaki's In Praise of Shadows. I'm surprised that I had not reviewed this on Netherword before. Thanks for watching, everyone. Till next time.